morning, and welcome to Rising. We have an awesome show for you today, and if you're confused by what you're watching, please don't be. We are proceeding boldly into an exciting new future in our new studio location. I think it's great. I love the color behind us.
We like it. We're fans of this. Our new accommodations.
Yes.
Love it.
Now viewers have to bear with us. We're still deciding, how far forward we sit.
Exactly. How close to each other we should be if we get animated or angry.
I want a bowl for this table. I want some various things.
The big beautiful bowl we've decided to call it.
And
right?
people can see our legs now, which I don't know, maybe that's the main draw.
Rating spike, I would say, for sure.
But people who've been watching as long as I've been hosting Rising know that though the look has changed with some frequency, it's still the same Rising content you expect and need and love, which we will be getting to right now.
It is a perfect segue, Robbie. So let's get started. What is on your radar?
Well, was Jeffrey Epstein an intelligence asset, and is that the reason the federal officials have consistently declined to reveal more information about who was involved in his underage sex trafficking ring? This question has been on the minds of everyone who closely followed the Epstein saga for years, and now President Donald Trump himself was finally asked about it. And the president did not appreciate the question. In fact, he seems annoyed that media reporters are still asking about Epstein. Here was his response to a direct question about whether Epstein was an intelligence asset.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time, and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this, where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy with what happened in Texas. It just seems like a desecration. But
Trump then gave the floor to Attorney General Pam Bondi, who said she would look into it and get back to the media on the intelligence asset question. Yeah, right. Now look, the reason the Trump administration is suddenly back-footed on the Epstein issue is because multiple government officials have been exposed as either liars or grifters. Now let me explain. Multiple top officials, including Bondi, but also FBI Director Kash Patel and Deputy Director Dan Bongino, came to prominence in part because they promised that they would reveal everything the government knew about Epstein if support from MAGA propelled them into positions of power. Now the MAGA base elevated them and trusted them to deliver on this key promise: release the Epstein client list. Make public what the government knows about powerful men who solicited sex with underage girls while hanging around with this creep Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Expose any in law enforcement or government who protected them or misled the public on their behalf. It's that simple. That was the promise. Now, for many conservatives, libertarians, even many on the left, frankly, this was serious stuff. A sexual predator with vast social ties to government and big business got away with his appalling crimes for years, engineered a sweetheart prison deal once apprehended, and then went right back to his misdeeds afterward. He palled around with Bill Gates and Prince Andrew. He was a major financial force in the U.S. Virgin Islands and a political force. He had a relationship with Bank of America. He hobnobbed with politicians in both parties, Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, going way, way back. And of course, he eventually died in prison under suspicious circumstances. Now, I, for one, think it's perfectly plausible that he did kill himself. I've said that a lot on the show. But you can't help but wonder, I don't blame anyone for wondering, whether any powerful people had an interest in silencing him. Importantly, the Bonginos and Patels of the world vowed to clear all this up. But now their answer is there's nothing to see here. All the information's already public. I mean, maybe, but that's pretty unsatisfying. They certainly acted like there was more to come. Bondi, in fact, engineered a now ridiculous-seeming photo op in which he gave binders supposedly containing Epstein info to MAGA influencers like DC Drano and Libs of TikTok. Now, the binders were labeled Phase 1, as if this was just the first in a series of incredible revelations. What was in those binders? Information we already knew? Sigh. Well, so that all seems like grifting, frankly. Like Bondi and company misled not just the public, but their own boosters, their own fans in particular. These people are understandably upset. Liz Wheeler, a conservative influencer who did receive the Epstein binder, she wrote on X that Bondi should lose her job. Now, the other possibility is that this isn't a grift. There actually is additional damning information about Epstein's associates in the government's possession. But the reason they aren't telling you more about it is this. The the intelligence community relied on Epstein for years, this is the theory, was well aware of his sexual proclivities, but turned a blind eye to that so that he could continue providing intelligence or even blackmail materials to the US government or to a foreign power. Does that sound like a conspiracy theory? Maybe it is, but the alternative explanation is that several of the most prominent leaders of the MAGA movement treated their own supporters, you guys, like chumps. And I don't like it, Niall. I don't like it.
No, I mean, I think that we are broadly in agreement on this, actually. This isn't one of the issues where we've big ideological differences. Jeffrey Epstein was at the nexus of a whole lot of influential, powerful people while being a predator on a huge scale. Obviously, that raises questions. You rightly in your radar suggested that are these people like Bondi and Kash Patel and all that liars or grifters? And I think that's really the key question. Because either they were knowingly saying stuff that was untrue to sort of gin up the base, right, and to aggravate people, or it was just like nonsense. And so that is a real problem, I think, for them. One of the points I would make in addition to the ones you made is it's not only what they said about unveiling this, it's the fact that there are people now close to President Trump who suggested that keeping this off limits was nefarious, including Donald Trump Jr. in 2023 tweeting, "Show us all the Epstein list. Why would anyone protect those scumbags? Ask yourself this question daily and the answer becomes very apparent." Well, is the answer still very apparent? Has the answer changed?
Right, because now they're the ones protecting this list if it does exist. And maybe it just doesn't exist.
Right.
Maybe, but they should have said that much more clearly from the start, because Pam Bondi, as recently as a couple of weeks ago, in response to media questions about this from conservatives, from Fox, gave the impression that it did exist and that we'd be getting more disclosures about people who were involved. Maybe that she just wasn't paying close enough attention, or it was not acknowledging that information had already been released.
Yeah, I mean, if it's
just a big nothing burger, that's so unsatisfying given what their position with respect to this has been.
And the issue about that Fox interview is it wasn't just that it exists in some abstract or nebulous fashion. It was apparently on her desk and has now seemingly disappeared from her desk into the ether where there isn't any information.
The intelligence asset idea, by the way, my understanding is that is an idea introduced itself by Alex Acosta, a former Trump administration official from the first season of the Trump presidency, who was also the relevant legal authority in Florida for the first prosecution of Epstein. And I believe now, it's not a solid source. I believe it's an unnamed source to the Daily Beast or something, said that he had said that. So it could be mistaken.
Right.
But frankly, it is not beyond, it doesn't beggar the belief system or challenge my imagination that much that now they get in charge and they go, okay, let's release it all. And they find out, oh, wait a minute. Sure. He knew things and he was gathering information or doing state-sponsored blackmail, and we can't bring any of that to light, which is horrifying, but I can believe it.
Oh, I mean, the whole thing is just so massively sketchy that there are absolutely valid questions and they haven't been answered at all. Meanwhile, up next, leaked audio of President Trump saying he's going to bomb the blank out of Moscow if Putin attacked Ukraine.
President Trump is not too happy with Russian President Vladimir Putin over his continued invasion of Ukraine.
Here's the president at his cabinet meeting yesterday.
We're not happy with Putin. I'm not happy with Putin. I can tell you that much right now, because he's killing a lot of people, and a lot of people are dying, and it should end. And I don't know, we get a lot of thrown at us by Putin. For you want to know the truth, he's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
Now, Trump said he was very disappointed in Putin after the two had a call last week. The next day, Trump said he had a good call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
The Pentagon had paused some weapons deliveries to Ukraine, but Trump says he's now reversing course. Let's listen to that.
Putin is not treating human beings right. He's killing too many people. So we're sending some defensive weapons to Ukraine, and I've approved that.
So who ordered the pause last week?
I don't know. Why don't you tell me?
On a related note, CNN has published audio obtained by 3 authors of a new book. That book, titled How Trump Retook the White House and the Democrats Lost America. The book says that during a 2024 fundraiser before becoming president, Trump told donors what he did to try to prevent Putin from invading Ukraine. Let's listen.
With Putin, I said, if you go in to Ukraine, we're going to bomb the out of Moscow. I'm telling you, I have no choice. The public wants it. The public. So he goes like, I don't believe you. He said, no way, and I said, way.
Senator Lindsey Graham introduced a new sanctions bill targeting Russia, and he says that Trump now backs it. So here we are. Look, I'm broadly comfortable with how Trump has handled the Russia-Ukraine issue in his second term. He wants to have a peace deal. It's very difficult to get peace at this point. And I would blame former President Biden for that, for encouraging the Ukrainian defense to the point where they're now totally on the verge of defeat by Russia. And Russia doesn't want to give up the effort because they think they can just conquer the entire country. And so Trump is in a very difficult negotiating position, but he is trying still to negotiate peace on behalf of Ukraine. And if Russia says they're interested in peace, but is not doing anything to signal that they actually will agree to some kind of peace, then Trump is saying, well, then to hell with them. Then we will continue to fund the Ukrainian defense. And that makes sense to me as a negotiating tactic. So I think I am on board with this. What do you say?
Well, I'll get to Trump in a second, but you said something that I can't really let go by there when you were talking about President Biden, and you said that he had made peace more difficult by encouraging the Ukrainian defense. Ukraine was invaded. A large army seized a significant part of their country. Should he have discouraged their defense? I mean, Ukraine has an interest in maintaining its territorial integrity and not letting a larger neighbor just seize its territory. So there is obviously a moral and political and strategic interest in Ukraine fighting off a Russian invasion.
Biden took the position, he said this, and his State Department said this, that there will be no end to our support for Ukraine. We will defend them to the end, to the last man. And even though military advisors to the U.S. and to Ukraine were very negative about the chance that Ukraine could entirely get Russia out of the country. So I think it was short-sighted to talk to them and have our posture to them be, yeah, we will defend you no matter what till the end of time.
But what would the alternative
be? It should have been a short-term, temporary. Yeah,
but then Putin just out. But then you say we'll support you for 6 months, and Putin knows, well, I'll stay there for 6 months.
But we use those 6 months to do negotiation. That's what.
But what would be the motivation for Putin to negotiate?
To not lose more of his people.
But he would know that he would get what he wanted because the U.S. would withdraw its support at a date certain.
I mean, you're right. If Russia is prepared to pay any cost to conquer all of Ukraine, well, then I don't know what we're doing. Then they're going to succeed at tremendous cost, and that's going to be that. I don't know that I'm going to get the U.S. involved in that point, not without like a formal declaration of war on Russia from our own Congress. But the point is, we're in this situation now, and Trump is trying to get them to sit down, and it seems like Putin, more so than Zelensky actually, is the wanting to continue conflict. And so Trump is going to say, and I put this question to guests we've had on who are more on the negative Ukraine, or Ukraine needs to surrender or give up or negotiate. I'm like, well, if Russia is not going to give any ground whatsoever, what incentive do we or Ukraine have to throw in the towel? And if Putin is committed to conquering the country, then as a negotiating tactic, it's okay for us to say we're going to then defend them more in order to bring them back to the table. So
first off, I don't believe it is certain that a Russian victory overcoming all of Ukraine is inevitable. But to get to the Trump point, to me this more aggressive rhetoric toward Putin points to the fact that Trump, though I think he does have non-interventionist instincts, but beyond that, he has very little ideological consistency on this at all. He does see it purely, I think, as transactional or deal-making, or he wants peace partly for his own aggrandizement. And so when Zelensky irritates him, he blames Ukraine for it being invaded, or he ambushes Zelensky in the Oval Office. And then Putin irritates him, and he says what he said about Putin or decides that he's going to resume American aid to Ukraine. The problem with that is it leaves even American allies uncertain about exactly what the game plan is, or, you know, will Trump have a bad call with Zelensky tomorrow and we'll decide to pause support to Ukraine once again? I think all of this sort of volatility, I don't at all buy this sort of cunning madman theory that it keeps people wrong-footed. I just think that it is what it looks like, which is complete inconsistency.
Well, it doesn't, I mean, I'm a pretty ideological person when it comes to all issues in foreign policy, but maybe there's a strength to it not always being ideological. Trump wants peace. He wants to work with Putin, but Putin's not playing ball. Trump's increasingly onto that, and is going to say, okay, if you're, you know, I'm very much for peace and non-interventionism, but if we're dealing with another entity that absolutely wants war and will do war no matter what, that we can't negotiate with or is not willing to negotiate, then I don't know, even the most peace-inclined among us are going to say, well, okay, if that's really what you want, that's what you're going to get. So I have no problem with Trump concluding that, and I hope Putin rethinks this.
The question of him concluding it is one thing. The concern, I think, is that he concludes the opposite the next day, which is, you know, a trademark of Trump and everything from tariffs to foreign wars.
Well, if the posture from Putin changes, then the Trump response should change, is what I would say.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's just, it seems to be much more fueled by personal atmospherics than by any strategic or principled concern, is what I would say.
Coming up, Trump vows no amnesty for illegal migrants workers, while the Agricultural Secretary offers another solution to replace the deported workers. We will get into that next.
So all of the
We've got to
above.
give the farmers the people they need, but we're not talking amnesty.
That was President Trump talking to his cabinet at the White House about not granting amnesty to undocumented immigrant farm workers. The farm sector had warned that mass deportation of farm workers would disrupt the US food supply. The Trump administration in June signalled that it might pause raids on some farm work sites, but it later reversed course.
Meanwhile, Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins suggested that able-bodied adults on Medicaid can replace deported farm workers. Let's watch.
The promise to America to ensure that we have a 100% American workforce stands, but we must be strategic in how we are implementing the mass deportation so as not to compromise our food supply. Ultimately, the answer on this is automation, also some reform within the current governing structure. And then also, when you think about, there are 34 million able-bodied adults in our Medicaid program. There are plenty of workers in America, but
Trump's tax cut and spending bill, passed on July 3rd, introduced work requirements for Medicaid. This rule might ultimately end coverage for millions of enrollees who do not meet the new employment or reporting standards. Rollins also emphasised the need to prevent foreign countries from owning farms within the United States. Let's listen to that.
the red states are the ones that are banning the Chinese-owned farmland, and this is true. But I have to believe that even the Democrat governors and even the blue states realize what a massive threat this is to national security and how important it is. So we plan to work with everyone, no matter which party, no matter which side of the aisle they're from, to ensure that the people of this country and our agriculture farmland is protected.
Foreign ownership of farmland, by the way, is something the President and the Secretary of the Interior get to have oversight over anyway. So even if in states where it is not formally banned, the federal government can veto it if a attempted land deal is done. So that's kind of that's a handled issue, I would say.
Sure.
I support the work requirements for Medicaid
Of course you do.
people. I do not, and if the job they take on is farm worker, that's fine. Unlike our Rising Fridays host Amber and I were arguing about this on the show that we do, Free Media, yesterday. She wants to deport absolutely everyone who is in the country illegally, no matter how law-abiding otherwise they are. That is not me. I would not meddle with the farm labor sector because I want to keep food prices low. That is the number one demand of voters, is to keep down the price of things. And if you massively interfere with this sector, you will raise prices. I think that would be bad. I think Trump knows that, and his instincts on this are pretty good, and he wants to not do a mass deportation of farm workers. He wants to deport violent criminals, gang-affiliated people, terrorists. That's what he wants to do. Now, but he faces pressure internally from some in MAGA, like Stephen Miller, who wants to deport literally everyone, to go further, and he doesn't want to do that, but he knows a lot of his base does, so he's not going to call it amnesty, but I predict he is going to do something along those lines of leaving them in place and not deporting them, which is what I think would be best for everyone. Better for them, better for us, because we pay less in food prices.
So let me begin with what Brooke Rollins said, which I regard as ludicrous, frankly. The idea that you are going to deport farm workers and get people on Medicaid to then just slide into the farm workers' jobs in some neat, tidy, that's all done and dusted way, I think is absurd. For a start, I think she's capitalizing on a misconception on the right that people on Medicaid are scroungers or malingerers. For a start, the vast majority of able-bodied people on Medicaid work as it is. It is a program that, by and large, serves people who work low-wage jobs. Now, then they have imposed these working requirements for people aged from 19 to 64. Now, obviously, employment, particularly low-wage employment, which tends to be more manual, gets more difficult, generally speaking, as one gets older. The idea that some 55 or 60-year-old person who is suffering from a chronic disease or diabetes, something that does not make them not able-bodied, but is a genuine medical problem, is going to go and start picking fruit in farms in the Deep South is just an absurd suggestion. And I think that it is, the problem is the whole idea of the work requirement is to kick people off Medicaid. The whole reason for that requirement is we can save money on Medicaid so we can give it to very rich people in the Trump tax breaks. So the thing is inequitable to begin with. And this kind of rhetoric is just, I think, glib and pays no attention to just one final point, Robbie. There will have to obviously be verification of these jobs. Georgia is the only state that has a work requirement for Medicaid so far. 90% of the money they've spent on the new program has been spent on administrative costs to determine who's telling the truth and who's not, or what the paperwork is like. So it's inefficient, it's inequitable. I don't like it, as you might have noticed.
You don't like it. Well, but you agree with me, I'm sure, on not deporting the farm laborers in the first place, however, so then we wouldn't even come to that.
It wouldn't even come to that, but it would if Brooke Rollins' wishes come true.
Well, next up, the FBI is reportedly investigating former FBI Director James Comey and former CIA Director John Brennan. That's some interesting news we will discuss up next. 2016 Trump-Russia collusion saga is apparently not over. Sources tell Fox News Digital that ex-FBI Director James Comey and former CIA Director John Brennan are now under investigation for alleged criminal conduct relating to the Trump-Russia probe.
Regarding Brennan, the investigation involves allegations that he made false statements to Congress, the sources told Fox. It's unclear, however, if the investigation expands beyond that.
As for Comey, the specific elements of the investigation into him are still somewhat unclear. The source told Fox News the role the two played in the Russia probe was a conspiracy. Last week, the New York Post reported on a CIA review of the, quote, lessons they learned about the Russia probe. The Post writes, in the missive, Brennan insisted that the discredited Steele dossier be included, despite strong pushback from the CIA's two most senior Russia experts, who said it did not even meet the most basic tradecraft standards. The Post continues, another CIA official warned him that including the dossier risked the credibility of the entire paper, but Brennan formalized his position in writing, stating that my bottom line is I believe the information warrants inclusion in the report.
The CIA's report also alleges that Comey was involved in drafting the Russia-Trump assessment and pushed to include the Steele dossier in it. In May 2017, Brennan claimed while testifying to Congress that the Steele dossier was not part of the, quote, corpus of intelligence information we had. And according to a transcript obtained by Fox News, Brennan told the House Judiciary Committee in May 2023, quote, the CIA was very much opposed to having any reference or inclusion of the Steele dossier in the intelligence community assessment. And so they sent over a copy of the dossier to say that this was going to be separate from the rest of that assessment.
Now, the Justice Department Inspector General and Senate Intelligence Committee both found that Steele's reporting was not included in the body of the final assessment for then-President Obama, but as a footnote, the Steele dossier notoriously had very salacious claims about Trump, including details he engaged in acts with Russian prostitutes, that there was no additional subsequent reporting that it was correct. So this is a little bit complicated.
Really?
The situation is that, according to these reports, that kind of behind the scenes, Brennan particularly, maybe Comey, the Comey part is a little less clear, but Brennan pushed for the consideration of the Steele dossier in their report the Trump-Russia probe, even though others at the CIA said, we don't think this information is reliable, but he was really strenuous that it be included. And then where they're going to possibly have criminal charges is that he later, subsequently, before Congress or in a committee hearing, said, no, actually, that was not good intel, and I was not for including it. So it's going to be a kind of perjury-esque situation where what you said later contradicts your actual actions. Not that the actual actions would have been necessarily criminal, but what you said about them later. Now, for anyone listening goes, well, that seems like a kind of weak justification for a prosecution. I would say, like, okay, but people like Brennan and Comey, the intelligence and law enforcement, they crucify people for exactly that kind of thing all the time. So I'm always a little bit like,
who?
What?
Like who?
Like, are you kidding? Perjury, and I'm not saying just like for political reasons, but if they can't get you on the underlying crime, you go to jail for obstruction of justice or perjury. This is what happened to Michael Flynn, Martha Stewart, and on and on and on. It's not the actual thing, it's that then they talked to law enforcement or someone on the record and say, oops, you just contradicted a statement you said previously, now we gotcha.
Yeah,
so when this gets used on them, I'm playing a very tiny violin here.
Well, Michael Flynn lied to the FBI about an investigation, did he not?
Right, exactly. Yeah, he misled. He, in a long interrogation that he did not know was that they were after him for anything. He made statements to people in an informal setting. He wasn't brought in for formal questioning that contradicted things they already knew, and so they prosecuted him for that basis. That's exactly what they're trying to do to Brennan here. That something he said to Congress now contradicts something he said in this report previously, and so they've got him. It's the same thing.
Yeah, well, do they have him is one big question for a start. The thing about this is, let's see the evidence. If there is genuine evidence of this, then by all means, go ahead. But one of the suspicions I have here is the timing of it. You and I were talking just a few moments ago about the way that people like Pam Bondi and other people in the Justice Department have egg on their faces because of the Epstein thing. And not only on partisan lines, it has outraged a lot of MAGA influencers, let's say, and a lot of the MAGA base. When they're under that pressure, suddenly and miraculously, a story is leaked to Fox News that they're really going after two guys that the MAGA base hates in Brennan and Comey. Now, Fox got the headline. I mean, I think it was a well-written story, but the headline was like, there's criminal investigations into these guys. In the 19th paragraph, it talks about how Brennan testified that the CIA wanted the Steele dossier, quote, separate from the rest of that assessment. And in the 21st paragraph, it says, ultimately, Steele's reporting was not included in the body of the final ICA. It was used as a footnote. So, at the very best, that is hair-splitting about what separate from the rest of the assessment means. Then in James Comey's case, there is literally nothing. There is a source unnamed saying to Fox News they're investigating James Comey for unnamed deeds. So you have a DOJ under pressure from the Trump base that has decided that it is going to investigate John Brennan for, at best, a very fine semantic point, and investigate James Comey for stuff. Trust me, bro, of prosecutions.
I mean, I can't evaluate the James Comey one until I know more of what the underlying basis is.
Yeah, because none of us know. Well, none of us can.
Well, I'm not saying throw them in jail on a mere accusation, but these are tactics that law enforcement uses against, I'm not even talking about in a political sense, just against citizens and against people who stupidly talk to the police without consulting an attorney first. This happens time and time again. People, everyone from Daniel Penny was the most recent example. That I know you're not tremendously sympathetic to the individual, but he has no idea that they're interested in charging him with anything, and so he's talking to the police for a long period of time. Never do this.
We agree
Never
on that point.
do this.
We agree on that
Consult
point.
a lawyer. Shut the F up. Say nothing. Talk to an attorney. Have you ever seen this? It's a famous YouTube video. I rewatch it every now and then by James Duane. He's a law professor on why you should never, under any circumstances, talk to the police.
Yep.
Don't do it. If you want to be a good citizen and you have important information you want to transmit to the authorities, you do that. You mediate that through an attorney. Everything you say can and will be used against you, but cannot be used for you. In your defense, it can never help you. You don't know what they're interested in. That's kind of a side matter. So anyway, I don't want to lock people up for mere technicalities or stupid little trivialities, so we'll see if there's more to it. But it seems relevant to me that...
Does the timing not give you any pause? Given that we were just talking, your radar...
Yeah, I guess, but this is the problem, right? Because the law is so vast, there's so many criminal statutes, we're all violating the law in so many ways we don't understand. It is always possible to pursue charges against someone for something, and you can do that on a political basis, but still have like an underlying justification for doing so. I would argue for Trump in the campaign finance issue, right? There's an example where they pursued him for something that would not necessarily be considered criminal, or if a different person did it, it might not have been escalated to federal charges. So is them doing it political, even though technically you could make an argument for why it did violate the law? It is political, but also there was probably some validity to it, but then it's unfair because they didn't do it to anyone else. You know what I mean? You come away with a frustrating morass of difficulty and mixed motivations. But we'll see.
We shall see.
There's more to this.
See how it goes. Talking of law, in a different matter, SCOTUS is siding with President Trump on the mass firings of government workers, while Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson calls the move a wrecking ball. Stay with us.
Supreme Court has greenlit the Trump administration to launch their plans for mass layoffs and reorganizations at federal agencies. The High Court lifted an order from a lower court which temporarily blocked the dismissal plans of thousands of workers. These changes are set to affect 19 agencies and departments, including the State Department and the Social Security Administration.
And now Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson is slamming the ruling and condemning her colleagues who decided in favor of it. Jackson called the order a wrecking ball in a scathing 15-page dissent. She also says recent rulings by the court's conservative majority pose, quote, an existential threat to the rule of law.
Others on social media had different views about the decision. Conservative internet personality Nick Sorter writes, "The lazy, useless hacks in government are headed straight to the unemployment line. Major win. Jackson once again proves she should not be on the court."
Meanwhile, Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren is railing against the ruling, saying of the potential laid-off employees, those are Social Security workers who help seniors get their checks on time, public health workers who keep us safe, and more. Trump wants to make it harder for people to get help.
We're going to disagree on this one, I'm
imagine
sure.
we are, yes.
I am happy about this ruling, but I don't know, though. Would you say that, while I'm sure you're against these layoffs and these reorganizations, I don't know, is really the argument that the executive of the federal government, the in charge of the federal workforce, has no power or authority to restructure it or to lay off workers? I mean, if that is the case, can government possibly work efficiently? Our government is massive and bloated and bureaucratic. Most people, I know that government is not the same thing as a private organization, certainly, but to be successful and effective in a private market to provide services correctly to people, you have to be able to hire and fire people somewhat at will to restructure departments. That's how large organizations, companies work. If the Supreme Court were to say, no, you have no power to do that whatsoever, I think we would just be totally inept.
But it's not saying that you have no power whatsoever to lay off anyone. It's an argument about the scale of the restructuring. And I do think, although we will disagree on it, that it cuts across ideological lines to some degree, because you are a vigorous defender, I would say, of the role of Congress and of not having an overarching executive. One of the arguments that is made against letting Trump do what he wants in this case is that it would winnow away programs and agencies that have been mandated by Congress to a point where they can no longer do their job. Now, that's the matter that the lower courts have been trying to legislate. The Supreme Court decision that we're talking about has not said, yes, what Trump wants to do is legally right, tick that box, it's all good. They have said, while it has been litigated by the lower courts, this can go ahead. And just briefly, one of the reasons I say that this cuts across ideological lines is Ketanji Brown Jackson, who is ideologically very liberal, is making an argument that I think used to be a sort of old school conservative argument, which is radical change can often have unintended consequences. Therefore, you need to be sure of the wisdom of those changes. She talks about, for example, that the lower courts, that if the Supreme Court had ruled differently yesterday, it would have had the effect of keeping the practical harm reducing preservation of the status quo, whereas allowing it to go through is allowing, quote, all the harmful upheaval the edict entails while the lower courts evaluate its lawfulness. So those don't seem unreasonable or even particularly left-wing views to me. They seem like arguments for a more temperate approach while the lawfulness of the thing is being decided.
I mean, I guess I would say in response to that, there's a kind of radicalism to just continuing to let the federal government and the growth of the government spiral out of control. And also in terms of that's a good point to bring up congressional oversight. And I certainly wish Congress was more active and more involved in doing restructuring of government. Yes, I think that would be ideal. The worst case, from my point of view, is just leaving it to the agencies themselves, which will never do any pruning ever. They just want to grow. Themselves. That's the worst case scenario. The difference, though, here to me, I'm big into the Constitution and what our founders, how they intended, what role of government they intended. I'm so insistent that Congress do more on foreign policy because it was so clear in the writing of our documents and from our founders' perspective that they wanted Congress to be the main body declaring war and deciding foreign policy and just a president that carries it out. With some of this stuff, though, the founders never would have imagined the federal government being a mass employer in the realms of education and healthcare and so much else. So it's almost, I would say it's almost beyond the scope of what they comprehended our government would do. So it's a little bit more, I have less of a insistence that it be managed by Congress, even though I think that would be ultimately for the best, given that we have such a large government as an employer functioning at the way a large corporation does, to not give, at least in the same way that a CEO or managers have a lot of power to restructure the company, to not have our effective CEO have anything approaching that power, for the Supreme Court to say you have nothing approaching that power, seems to me like it's just going to be unworkable. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that you do raise a very fair point about the growth of government in contemporary America versus what the founders envisioned. I mean, that's obviously vastly different. And so that, I think, is a valid point. But I get back to the point that Jackson raised in her ruling, which is this is going to have massive impacts on people who are currently employed by the federal government. At one stage, the VA was talking about laying off 30,000 people. In the face of criticism, they've now pulled back from that to about 10,000. There were also groups, of which the NIH was one, talking about another 10,000 people being laid off. These are things that neither the lower court nor the Supreme Court have decided are legal, because the argument is they may be such a fundamental restructuring that a president does not have the authority to do them. So that fundamental question of legality is up in the air. Meanwhile, we're allowing the layoffs to go ahead. So it's like, yeah, we can just cast these people out onto the unemployment line. We don't really know if it's legal or not, but let's see. That'll be decided at some later point. Right, well, the Supreme Court is on some level showing its hand, or say, we think this one's probably legal. Other things the Trump administration has decided to do, they've stopped, they've enjoyed. They said, we think this is probably not legal, but we'll check it later, but this is how we feel about it. I mean, they are splitting the baby on some of these things. I think the Doge cuts to spending that are going to be, that were not rescinded by Congress, are going to be reinstated. Some of the stuff Trump's done on immigration gets thrown out. But this is the Supreme Court saying, well, on this one, we think they probably do have this power.
Well,
so
we shall see.
you win some, you lose some, Niall.
That is certainly true. Elon Musk's chatbot, Grok, is going rogue, firing off a slew of anti-Semitic posts. We'll talk about that next. Elon Musk's Grok is going off the rails. The AI chatbot yesterday suddenly started spewing hate speech about Jewish people and referring to itself as a MechaHitler.
This is a weird one. In a since-deleted post, Grok referred to Israel as that clingy ex still whining about the Holocaust. Grok recently made headlines in May when it immediately started ranting about white genocide in South Africa in unrelated prompts.
The Grok account released a statement about the slew of posts, saying, "We are aware of recent posts made by Grok and are actively working to remove the inappropriate posts. Since being made aware of the content, XAI has taken action to ban hate speech before Grok posts on X. We are able to quickly identify and update the model where training could be improved." It all comes after long-time complaints Musk has about the model undermining right-wing narratives and vowing that it would be updated. Musk also has been hyping up Wednesday's release of the new version of the AI chatbot, Grok 4.
Now, the Anti-Defamation League spoke out about the incident, writing, "What we're seeing from Grok LLM right now is irresponsible, dangerous, and anti-Semitic. Plain and simple, this supercharging of extremist rhetoric will only amplify and encourage the anti-Semitism that is already surging on X and on many other platforms."
Dropsite News reporter Ryan Grimm called out Grok's posts, saying, quote, "Hitler linking Judaism and communism was central to his early efforts to politicize his anti-Semitism and gather support for exterminating enemies of the far right. He called it Judeo-Bolshevism. Seeing Grok repeat it is foul beyond words."
Very Ryan Grimm take. This is obviously very bad. It is, as you described, weirdly obsessed with Hitler right now. Clearly, they fiddled with something in a way that they some kind of filter related to how it handles this topic that has gone awry, as it did with the South Africa question. This is similar, but in the complete opposite direction to when I think it was ChatGPT, the image generating thing, had some kind of diversity check where like it would not, if you were like, draw a white king, it just wouldn't do it. It would not make you a picture of a white person. It made everything diversity, which was kind of funny. This is maybe less funny.
A lot less, I would say.
Certainly the hate group monitor watchdog people are not happy about it. So this should be fixed. I think they will fix it. I can't imagine Elon Musk wants this thing he really likes on the platform to be engaged in this. I would caution people. You know, I saw people reacting to this like both ways. I mean, some people were like, "Oh, it's finally been freed to say what it really thinks." We should, as AI becomes more and more a part of our lives, we must resist the temptation to humanize it, to act like it's a person. It is not a person. It is not alive. It doesn't have independent thoughts. It is a machine. It is not self-aware and self-conscious. This is not its own thoughts. This is simply the inputs and the way it was programmed. And like I'm saying, people apparently are, I don't want to sound like an old fogey who's panicked about what the kids these days are doing. Apparently, like, young people talk to it and it's just reaffirming everything. Take away the Hitler context of it for a minute. It's just, if you talk to it about the things you're upset about, it responds, and people are like developing relationships with it, like that Joaquin Phoenix movie, Her. It is not alive. It is not a substitute for a friendship. It doesn't care about you. It is not a thing with feelings. And I think insisting upon that is going to be more important as we go through the future.
Look, obviously I take the point that Grok is not a person tweeting
It's not your
these
friend.
things, but I think that if someone is programming it or supplying the algorithms or whatever it works off, I think it is, this is pretty grossly anti-Semitic stuff, talking about radical leftists with Ashkenazi surnames pushing anti-white hate and, basically lauding Hitler because he would have had the right idea to deal with these people. It is like the most base and crude elements of anti-Semitism. So whatever they tweaked to create that obviously there are questions to be asked about how, how and why that was done. It is pretty appalling stuff. And I don't think just saying, well, Grok's not a person, well, I know, but the fact that those answers were produced and put on a site that has so many millions of users, that is obviously troublesome. I'm not saying that you're saying it's not. I understand.
No, it needs to be,
you are.
absolutely needs to be fixed immediately. I quite liked the service before this most recent update. Now, I don't really, you can do like Grok, is this true on posts? I don't know. I generally found it pretty helpful and somewhat neutral. I guess Elon thought it was undercutting, again, right-wing positions too much. I thought it often was giving a pretty good summary of the, while saying, well, some people believe this for this reason, and some people believe this for this reason, and it seemed pretty good to me. Again, I'm generally optimistic about AI and how it will help us and make it easier to establish sources of information. I'm bullish on this technology, but I am not bullish because I think it's going to take over. Like I don't think we're on the verge of like the singularity and we're all going to be slaves to some computer mind that's evil and secretly Hitler. Yep. It's not making these choices independently. They reprogrammed it in a way. They should unprogram it. Grok is not doing this. Grok is a team of people, is the man behind the curtain.
Right, but I mean, obviously it would be vastly controversial if any AI engine had done this. But the fact that it is Elon's baby obviously does create sharper questions, because there's that infamous thing in 2023 where someone had tweeted about Jews fomenting anti-white hate, and Musk pop up to say, you have said the actual truth, and advertisers and others were understandably outraged. He supported the AfD in Germany, which is a far-right party. There are reasons why there are concerns with him.
Well, that does it for us on Rising Live today. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way today. Hope you liked our new studio. Let us know in the comments. I'll be reading them, how you feel about it, and maybe what we should adorn this desk with. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any of our content. For those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're also available, of course, in podcast format. And I'll see you back here tomorrow. See ya.